"We're modernizing operations," she announced to the entire team, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "Some positions are becoming redundant." My name is Darren Lee. For 17 years, I ran the automation systems at Velwin Manufacturing in Grand Rapids, Michigan. 17 years of calibrating machines, writing firmware, building systems nobody else understood. 17 years of making other people look good. "The transition will be immediate," Jessica continued, her voice carrying across our morning huddle. The factory floor hummed behind us, a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. "We've contracted with Nexora Labs for our systems management going forward." I stood there, arms crossed as 35 faces turned toward me. Not with sympathy, just curiosity, wanting to see how the old guy would take it. I nodded once and went back to my station, began unplugging my laptop, emptying my drawer of the coffee mug my daughter made me in 3rd grade, the spare reading glasses, the notebook filled with handwritten code sequences. The factory had changed management 3 times since I started. This was the first time they'd decided I wasn't necessary. No yelling, no arguing. I'd watched it happen to others over the years, men who fought back and still ended up gone, just with less dignity. I wasn't going to give Jessica the satisfaction. She approached as I was packing the last of my things into a cardboard box. "Your severance package is generous," she said, sliding a folder across my desk. 2 months plus your accrued vacation time." "Generous?" I repeated. The folder stayed where she placed it. "Darren, try to understand. Your systems are, well, they're outdated. Nexora is implementing a complete digital transformation. Cloud-based monitoring, machine learning algorithms. It's where manufacturing is headed." I zipped my laptop bag. "The calibration files, they'll reverse engineer whatever they need." She glanced at her watch. "Human resources needs to see you before you leave." I nodded and lifted my box. Jessica had been plant manager for 8 months, MBA from some prestigious university. Talked about efficiency metrics and optimization protocols like they were magic spells. Never once asked how our proprietary systems actually worked. Never questioned why our factory had the lowest defect rate in the industry, despite running equipment that was over a decade old. I walked past the CNC machines I'd programmed, the conveyor system I'd customized, the quality control scanners with my custom algorithms. Jessica was right about one thing. I had built outdated systems, but I had built them to last. And I had built them so only I could fix them when they broke. I started at Velwin back when we made automotive components for just 3 car manufacturers. Now we supplied precision parts to 12 auto companies and had branched into aerospace. The old owner, Harold Velwin himself, hired me fresh out of college when I showed him how I could reprogram their first robotic arm to move 30% faster without losing accuracy. "Son, you speak their language," he'd told me, pointing at the machines. "That's rare." For 10 years, Harold let me build our automation systems my way. I wrote proprietary firmware for every major piece of equipment, created calibration routines that squeezed performance from machines well past their prime. When manufacturers discontinued support for older models, I kept them running. When new equipment arrived, I modified their software to integrate with our existing systems. After Harold retired, his son sold the company to Trough Freight, a logistics corporation branching into manufacturing. They kept me on because the numbers made sense. Why replace $50 million of equipment when my algorithms made them perform like newer models? Then Jessica arrived, young, ambitious, with PowerPoint slides showing how outdated our factory was compared to competitors. She never addressed me directly in meetings, preferring to talk about legacy systems like they were diseases needing eradication. 3 months ago, I noticed Nexora Labs representatives touring the factory floor, taking photos of control panels, asking operators questions. I approached Jessica afterward. "Are we bringing in consultants?" I asked. Just exploring some optimization opportunities, she replied, tapping at her tablet. Nothing to worry about. The next week, I was locked out of the management server. My access credentials suddenly expired. IT apologized for the glitch, but only restored partial permissions. I could still do my job, but certain administrative functions now required Jessica's approval. I mentioned it to Leon, our floor supervisor, and the closest thing I had to a friend at work. We sometimes fished together on weekends. Politics, he muttered. New manager needs to make her mark. Just keep your head down. That night, I backed up all my calibration files and code repositories onto my personal laptop. Not company property, my intellectual work. The systems would run fine without them. Until they didn't. Until a machine drifted from tolerance or a sensor needed recalibration. The fixes were all in my head and in my private notes, documented nowhere else. They were about to learn what 17 years of institutional knowledge was actually worth. My severance meeting with Human Resources lasted 20 minutes. Signatures, explanations of benefits, return of my building access card. The HR manager, Thomas, avoided eye contact throughout. He'd been with the company almost as long as I had. Is there anything else you need from me before I go? I asked when we finished. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Actually, Jessica mentioned you might consider a consulting arrangement. 2 weeks to help with the transition, paid at your current rate. I almost laughed. 2 weeks to download 17 years of knowledge. It would give you some additional income while you job search, he suggested weakly. I'll pass. I stood up. But thanks for the offer. Walking out through the factory floor, I passed Leon. He broke away from a conversation and followed me toward the exit. This is Step Darren, he said quietly. I told Jessica, you're the only one who understands how these systems work together. Apparently, Nixora Labs disagrees. They're salespeople. They don't know what they don't know. Leon glanced over his shoulder. What happens when the next calibration cycle comes up, or when the Southwest conveyor starts making that grinding noise it makes every winter? I shrugged. Not my problem anymore. Come on, man. 17 years and you're just walking away? I stopped at the door and turned to Leon. What exactly do you expect me to do? Beg for my job? Tell Jessica she's making a mistake? You think that would change anything? Leon had no answer. I clapped him on the shoulder. I'll call you. Maybe we can get that fishing trip in next weekend. But I wouldn't call. And deep down, I think Leon knew it. I drove home in silence. No radio, no calls, just the hum of tires on pavement. My house felt empty, even though it was filled with 17 years of belongings. My daughter was away at college. My wife and I had divorced 3 years prior. I sat in my home office chair and opened my laptop. A notification appeared. Velwin Manufacturing VPN disconnected. That's when it really hit me. 17 years erased in a single workday. All the late nights solving production emergencies, all the weekends spent upgrading systems while the lines were down. The knowledge of every quirk and flaw in our equipment. The pride I took in our defect rates, consistently the lowest among our competitors. All disposable, according to Jessica. I opened my personal drive and looked at the backup files I'd made. Calibration parameters, custom firmware, troubleshooting manuals I'd written but never shared. I had no intention of using them against the company, but I also had no intention of handing them over. They'd made their choice. They'd have to live with the consequences. I closed the laptop, went to the kitchen, and opened a beer. For the first time in 17 years, I didn't have to worry about being on call for a factory emergency. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a cold certainty settling in my chest. They would call eventually, and when they did, I would decide what 17 years of loyalty was really worth. On schedule. I updated my LinkedIn profile and received condolences from former colleagues at other companies. No one from Velwin reached out, not even Leon, until my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after my departure. Darren, it's Jessica Barnes from Velwyn Manufacturing. I let the silence stretch a beat too long. Hello, Jessica. I hope you're doing well. Her voice had lost some of its confidence. Listen, we're experiencing some issues with the southwestern conveyor line, and our team is having trouble diagnosing the problem. I was wondering if you might be available for a quick consultation. What kind of issues? Random stoppages, error codes that don't match any documentation. Production is down about 20% on that line. I closed my eyes. The southwestern conveyor, the one I'd warned maintenance about 3 months before my departure. The one that needed its controller firmware updated before winter. I see. And what does Nixora Labs say about it? A pause. They're still getting up to speed on some of our legacy systems. I'm sure they'll figure it out. I kept my tone neutral. After all, they're implementing a complete digital transformation. Jessica cleared her throat. Darren, I understand you might feel underappreciated, but this is affecting the whole team. People could lose shifts if we can't get this fixed. She was good, appealing to my loyalty to the floor workers. But I remembered how none of them had spoken up when I was escorted out. I'm available for consulting, I said finally. My rate is $300 per hour, 4-hour minimum, paid in advance, and I'll need a signed contract specifying the scope of work. That's more than twice your former salary rate. That's my consulting rate. Take it or leave it. Silence. Then I'll have to get approval. Can I call you back? Of course. She called back within the hour. They agreed to my terms. I drove to the factory the next morning, signed in as a visitor, and was escorted to the production floor. The southwestern conveyor sat idle, surrounded by Nixora technicians and frustrated operators. Leon spotted me and broke into a relieved smile. Thank God you're here. The problem took me exactly 27 minutes to diagnose. A firmware issue, just as I'd suspected. The solution would require accessing the calibration files I developed years ago. I'll need my laptop connected to the control system, I told Jessica, who had been hovering nearby. Of course, whatever you need. I connected my laptop and made a show of searching through folders, knowing exactly where the files were located. As I worked, I overheard 2 Nixora technicians whispering. Should have been documented somewhere. Complete mess, these legacy systems. I suppressed a smile. 45 minutes later, the conveyor hummed back to life. Operators returned to their stations. Jessica looked simultaneously relieved and uncomfortable. Thank you, Darren. I don't know what we would have done. Happy to help. I closed my laptop. Will there be anything else? Actually, she hesitated. We're having similar issues with the CNC machines in Bay 3. Random quality control failures. Tolerances drifting. Could you take a look while you're here? I checked my watch. That would exceed our agreed scope of work. I'd need another contract. Her face tightened. Darren, be reasonable. You're already here. I am being reasonable. I'm treating this as the business arrangement you made it when you eliminated my position. I packed up my laptop. Email me if you want to set up another consultation. As I walked away, Leon fell into step beside me. It's not just the CNC machines, he said quietly. Everything's starting to fail. Quality control is catching defects daily. Returns from customers are up 30%. I nodded but said nothing. They're in way over their heads, aren't they? Leon asked. Looks that way. Leon glanced around and lowered his voice. You saw this coming, didn't you? I met his eyes. I didn't have to see it coming, Leon. I built these systems. I know exactly what happens when they're not maintained properly. And you're going to make them pay for it. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. They already are. The calls became regular after that. Every week, sometimes twice, Jessica would reach out with another emergency. Each time I negotiated a new contract. Each time my rate increased slightly. Each time I fixed only the specific issue they hired me to address. 2 months after my departure, I received a different call. Mr. Lee, this is Andrew Keyes, Vice President of Operations at Trilla Freight. I sat up straighter in my chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Keyes. I'll get straight to the point. Our Grand Rapids facility is experiencing unprecedented quality control issues. Warranty claims have tripled. We've lost 2 aerospace contracts due to precision concerns. Jessica Barnes has informed me that you've been providing consulting services for specific technical problems. That's correct. I'd like to discuss a more comprehensive arrangement. I remained silent, waiting. We'd like to bring you back as a contractor, 6 months full-time, to resolve our current issues and properly document your knowledge of our systems. I see. I leaned back in my chair. And what happened to Nexora Labs? A pause. We're re-evaluating that relationship. Translation: they were being shown the door. I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction before responding. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Keyes, but I'm currently in discussions with several other companies. My availability is limited. Name your price, he said bluntly. I named a figure that was 3 times my former salary. Keyes didn't even hesitate. Fine, I'll have contracts drawn up today. 2 days later, I walked back into Velwyn Manufacturing as a contractor. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Leon informed me she'd been reassigned to another Trilla facility. As I reconnected my laptop to the main control systems, I discovered the extent of the damage. Nexora's attempts to reverse engineer my calibration procedures had corrupted key firmware. Their machine learning algorithms had drifted tolerances so far out of spec that nearly 30% of parts were failing final quality checks. But the most revealing discovery came when I accessed the management server. There, in a folder marked Strategic Plans, I found Jessica's original proposal to Trilla executives. It detailed how replacing me with Nexora Labs would save the company over $200,000 annually. It projected a temporary 3% increase in defect rates during transition, deemed acceptable for the cost savings. Jessica hadn't just eliminated my position to Modernize. She'd sacrificed quality for cost-cutting, gambling that the systems I'd built were simple enough for anyone to maintain. She'd never bothered to understand what I actually did. I called Leon into my office and showed him the document. He whistled low. She was gunning for you from day one. Not just me? I replied. Quality, precision, everything this factory built its reputation on. So what's your plan? Fix everything and walk away again? I looked at him. No, I'm going to fix their systems. Then I'm going to make sure this never happens again. How? I smiled slightly. By making myself irreplaceable in a whole new way. That night, I began designing a new factory management system, one that integrated all our existing equipment, but with proper documentation, proper fail-safes, proper transparency. One that would show executives exactly what they were getting for their money, and one that would require my ongoing consultation to maintain at my new contractor rates. They'd tried to replace me with algorithms. Now I would show them what 17 years of human experience was really worth. Over the next month, I methodically repaired every system in the factory. I started with the most critical production lines, the aerospace components, the high-precision automotive parts. I restored original calibration settings for my personal backups, updated firmware, and ran full diagnostics on every piece of equipment. Defect rates dropped immediately. Production speeds increased. The factory floor began to hum with its old efficiency. But I didn't stop there. Each night, I continued building my new management system. I called it Veltech, officially for Velwyn Electronic Tracking and Equipment Calibration. Unofficially, it was my insurance policy. I arranged a meeting with Andrew Keyes and the remaining management team 4 weeks into my contract. The immediate crises have been resolved, I began, standing before their conference table with my laptop connected to the projector. But you have a structural problem that goes beyond technical issues. Keyes leaned forward. Go on. Your quality control metrics were hidden from executive view. Jessica Barnes was able to present cost savings without revealing the true impact of her decisions. I brought up a screen showing production data from the past 3 months. Red lines showed defect rates climbing, warranty claims spiking, precision metrics failing, all while reported costs decreased. This is what happens when you optimize for one variable at the expense of everything else. The room was silent. I clicked to the next slide, showing my Veltec interface. This is what I propose: a full integration of all factory systems, with executive-level visibility, real-time quality metrics, predictive maintenance schedules, complete transparency between the factory floor and corporate headquarters. And this would prevent another situation like we just experienced? Keys asked. It would make the trade-offs visible, I replied. You might still choose to prioritize cost over quality, but you do it with full awareness of the consequences. I clicked through more screens, showing how Veltec monitored each machine, tracked material flow, predicted maintenance needs, and calculated true cost per part, including defect and warranty expenses. How long would implementation take? Asked Keys. 3 months for full integration. I've already built the core architecture. And who would maintain it afterward? Here it was. The moment I'd been building toward. I would, under a long-term consulting agreement, 2 days per week on site, my company would retain ownership of the Veltec software, licensing it to Trilla Freight with full support and updates. Your company? Keys raised an eyebrow. Lee Industrial Systems, my new consulting firm. I hadn't actually formed the company yet, but Keys didn't need to know that. That sounds expensive, one of the other executives commented. Less expensive than what just happened, I replied evenly. I brought up another slide showing the total losses over the past 3 months. Lost contracts, warranty claims, overtime, emergency fixes, just over $3.4 million. The room went quiet again. My annual consulting fee would be $320,000. The Veltec license would be $150,000 per year. Total cost, $470,000 annually. Compare that to your recent losses. Keys studied me. You've put a lot of thought into this, Mr. Lee. I've had time to think, I replied, about value, about knowledge, about what happens when companies treat people as interchangeable parts. He nodded slowly. I'll need to take this to the board, but I think you've made a compelling case. As the meeting ended, Leon was waiting outside. He fell into step beside me as I walked back to my temporary office. How'd it go? He asked. We'll see. Either they value what I'm offering or they don't. Leon smirked. After the beating they just took, they'll value it. I stopped at my door. By the way, I'll need a shop floor manager for Lee Industrial Systems, someone who knows these machines, these people. Interested? Leon blinked in surprise, then slowly smiled. You serious? Dead serious. I'm done building success for other people. Time to build something of my own. 1 week later, Andrew Keys called to accept my proposal. Not only for the Grand Rapids facility, but for all 6 of Trilla's manufacturing plants. 6 months later, I stood in the observation room above the factory floor, watching operations run smoother than they ever had. Beside me stood Andrew Keys and another executive I didn't recognize. Darren, this is Patricia Winters, our new Chief Operations Officer, Keys said. We shook hands. Impressive operation, Patricia said, gesturing toward the factory. Andrew tells me your Veltec system has revolutionized our visibility into manufacturing quality. It just makes visible what was always there, I replied. Well, it's caught the attention of our entire executive team, especially after what happened in Pittsburgh. I raised an eyebrow. Keys looked uncomfortable. We implemented a similar modernization at our Pittsburgh facility, Patricia explained, with similarly disastrous results. But thanks to your system, we caught it before it became a full-blown crisis. I'm glad to hear that. There's something else you should know, Patricia continued. Jessica Barnes has been let go. I kept my expression neutral. I see. Not just relocated, he's added, terminated, after we discovered she'd received consulting fees from Nixora Labs while working for us, a clear conflict of interest. So that was it. Jessica hadn't just been cutting costs to impress executives. She'd been getting kickbacks from Nixora. We've also instituted a new corporate policy, Patricia said. All cost-cutting initiatives must include quality impact assessments, and all technical systems must have proper knowledge transfer protocols. Sounds sensible, I replied. Patricia smiled. We're calling it the Lee Protocol, actually. Your Veltec system proved the value of institutional knowledge. I looked down at the factory floor, at Leon training new technicians, at operators working confidently with equipment they understood, at the quality metrics displayed on large screens throughout the facility, all running on my system, all generating revenue for Lee Industrial Systems. Thank you for that, I said quietly. It means more than you know. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after my termination, I stood in my new office in downtown Grand Rapids. Through the window, I could see the Grand River, trees along its banks turning red and gold. The space housed 12 employees now, engineers, technicians, and support staff for Lee Industrial Systems. My phone buzzed with a message from Leon. Bay 4 upgrade complete. All systems green. I smiled. Leon had become my right-hand man, overseeing implementation at all Trilla facilities while I focused on expanding to new clients. We'd added 3 more manufacturing companies in the past quarter alone. The industry had started to talk about the company that specialized in preserving legacy knowledge, about the system that bridged the gap between aging equipment and modern analytics, about the founder who had turned a termination into a triumph. On my desk sat an industry magazine with our story featured on the cover. The Knowledge Gap: How Lee Industrial Systems is Saving Manufacturing Millions. Below it lay an invitation to speak at next year's automation conference. On the panel Jessica Barnes had once headlined. I picked up a framed photo, my daughter in her graduation cap and gown from last spring. She had just started a job in industrial engineering, inspired partly by watching her father's career implode and then rise from the ashes. "Dad, you didn't just take lemons and make lemonade," she told me at her graduation dinner. "You took lemons and built a lemonade empire." My office door opened and my assistant poked her head in. "Your 10 is here, the Velwin family." I nodded. Harold Velwin, long retired, had reached out about buying back his old company from Trilla. He wanted my advice on modernizing while preserving quality. I straightened my tie and walked to the conference room. No longer an employee, but a trusted advisor. No longer disposable, but essential. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just proving them wrong. It's becoming something they never imagined you could be.